What I love about Spider-Man 2002 is that it can be my emotional support movie one day, and then what I watch really high the next. To ensure I consistently experience its utter grandeur, I watch it at least twice a month, and quote it on the daily.
Hello. You're quite the science whiz.
Thanks. Let's get some lunch some evening.
Christmas meat.
Misery, misery, misery.
But what really lies at the heart of this blockbusting Hollywood classic is director Sam Raimi's signature frightening vision, wrapped in that explosive early 2000s movie magic. Hi, this is how I sound. I once ran a YTP channel, but suddenly decided that my opinions were different than everyone else's and chose to quit, burn all my belongings, and buy a cheap mic to talk to you all today about an element of high class that I think is missing from cinema called pizzazz. And let me tell you, you can't spell pizzazz without...
Oh.
Spider-Man is a film that I think captures the early 2000s perfectly in a nutshell. It's full of that flashy, stylized momentum you'd expect from a music video, yet it has this refined and methodical motion to its narrative. Brick by brick, it's just the hero's journey story. Guy gets powers, loses his father figure, uses power for good, stops the bad guy, and gets the girl. But below its glossy, delicious exterior is a lot more to me. Next to the web-slinging and post-9/11 American spirit, lies the twisted tale of two science experiments gone awry. Because at its core, Spider-Man is a frightening yet spectacle-driven monster movie for a master of horror in his own right. Whether it's X-rated gore fests, family films, B-movie adventures, or even dramas, Sam Raimi has done it all. He's pretty much the reason Disney and Warner Brothers scout for horror directors to make their superhero movies now. This is a man who knows how to get down to business.
Stay off this set, never come back.
I think it's his eye for the grotesque that allows him to translate campy or otherwise distasteful situations into something bold and theatrical. Raimi brings some of that terrifying pizzazz to everything he touches. Yes, even that one. And Spider-Man is no exception. Raimi is an ultra fan of the Spider-Man comics, and sprinkles in almost as much horror as he does with love and appreciation into his adaptation. Now, I haven't actually read a single Spider-Man comic, but that actually makes me the best person to talk about this. How? Well, it doesn't matter. See, what Raimi adds to all the American cheese that is this movie is a healthy injection of mad science. Science experiments gone wrong are practically a staple of most monster movies, and the entire Spider-Man trilogy for that matter. But none of the other installments nail it quite as perfectly as Norman Osborn's transformation into the Green Goblin.
Dr. Osborn, please. The performance enhancers aren't ready.
Don't be a coward. Risks are part of laboratory science.
Oh my God. Norman?
We barely even tapped the vastness of human potential. Back to formula.
A friend of mine once said, superhero movies without the hero are just straight up horror films. All they would be is a killer wreaking havoc on a helpless city. So while Peter's transformation into Spider-Man takes up a majority of the film, I think it's important to explore the real monster behind this story before we talk about Spider-Man himself. That's why the main subject of our video has gotta be Norman Osborn. He's the opposite of Peter Parker, the inverted Peter Parker, and it complements the hero better if we work backwards. Fuck Peter, he's not the star of this video. Norman Osborn is portrayed to the likes of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. In the Robert Stevenson novella, Dr. Henry Jekyll creates a serum that transforms him into his demented alter ego, Edward Hyde. He uses Hyde to commit all of his dark inner desires and manipulates the world to his benefit.
You killed them. We killed them.
He eventually loses grip on staying Jekyll completely and starts becoming Hyde without even using the serum. By the end of the story, his transformation into Hyde becomes permanent, and he faces execution for his crimes. While Norman isn't directly inspired by the novella or film adaptations, he carries a lot of the same traits and energy, what with the split personality and all. Norman's mind slowly but surely molds completely into the Green Goblin as he loses grip on reality. But to understand the monster behind Norman, it's important that we look into his character's psyche. What are his motivations? What are his feelings? But most importantly, what's his endgame? Keep in mind we're sticking to elements solely found in the film here, not just the comics. At first glance, Norman just seems upset that his science division is being flushed down the toilet and decides to take matters into his own hands, as in killing the board viciously. Skeleton's very nice touch, but seems kind of petty, don't you think? But upon rewatching the film for the 56th time, with a little herbal encouragement, I started to notice there was a lot more inner turmoil going on in that scary sharp cheekbone head of his. To start things off simply, Norman is a terrible father. He constantly treats Harry like a failure in a super passive-aggressive manner.
It's not the first time I've been proven wrong.
And latches on to Peter, one he sees as a truly exceptional hard worker.
Want to make it on your own, Steve? That's great.
Something he definitely believes about himself.
I'm something of a scientist myself.
But with all his hard work came neglect for his family, which he deems a necessary sacrifice. He projects the energy of working alone, manning up, and hard work onto Harry throughout the film. So when he jumps into that cold machine, his rash mindset actually makes sense. The big problem with his character, though, is he assumes he's going to receive respect for all of his hard endeavors and sacrifices to family, which gives him this angry sense of...
You know how much I sacrificed?
Which gives him this angry sense of entitlement. Rich guy capitalist entitlement.
There are 8 million people in this city, and those teeming masses exist for the sole purpose of lifting the few exceptional people onto their shoulders.
With that goblin juice running through his brain, his personality splits into an alter ego that can accomplish everything he ever dreamed of.
To say what you won't, to do what you can't, to remove those in your way.
Which apparently included having a Halloween-themed arsenal.
Well, to each his own.
But his newfound attachment to Peter muddles his search for vengeance and casts a shadow of envy upon him and his friends. Peter is the hard-working family man he could never be, and his new goal eventually becomes to destroy everything he's got. We'll get to that later. Let's talk about what makes the Goblin so deliciously terrifying for a second.
The Zone.
The costume is absolutely electrifying on screen. It's also in keeping with the comics and gives him a high-tech update. It's missing the purple, but if you look closely, you can actually see a purplish hue bouncing right off of it. What makes it or breaks it for some people is the mask. I love it. The way Raimi puts it is...
A mask, something frightening to strike terror into the hearts of the enemy.
Seeing Willem Dafoe's ultra-wide lips through the mouth of the mask and those revolving eyes also make it look more personal. The mask combined with the military-grade suit turns the Green Goblin into a pure Halloween warrior. The concept designs for the more organic take do look better than what we got in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, but I think it would have taken the monster angle a bit too literally. Norman's inner madness is enough to sell him as a creature of neglect and insanity. And while we're led to believe that David Bowie's Bulge from Labyrinth is the incomparable Bulge to end all Bulges, it's Willem Dafoe's uncontainable fruit basket that's really on par with Bowie's. I mean, just look at the crew struggling to capture it in true cinematic perfection. Lord Jesus, I'm getting off topic. But if we really want to talk about what makes the Goblin so mortifying, then just take a glimpse at some of his attempted dark deeds, had they been successful. Let's talk about Peter, Spider-Man, the best Spider-Man. He's a quiet and modest kid who borders on being a nice guy, but his loving and supporting parents prevented that.
Hey, Michelangelo.
But behind that lovable and doughy exterior is the potential for pure evil.
Are you afraid that I'm gonna turn into some kind of criminal?
When Peter gets his powers, he experiences a huge rush of euphoria. Unlike Norman, he's never known power, and it starts to become clear he can use it to his benefit. These powers are more than just jumping like a fucking dork across buildings and making out with billboards. His dream of dating MJ feels closer, and to his own surprise, he finds that he's actually capable of knocking people's teeth out. Bonesaw was not ready. But his fun power trip quickly turns into entitlement when he doesn't get what he wants.
I need that money.
Just like Norman, except there are direct repercussions for his actions.
Thanks.
What's so great about the Uncle Ben passing scene, apart from him dying a painful death, is that it could have very well been Peter's villain origin story. I mean, the revenge scene is so pulse-pounding it could honestly be its own movie. Peter's first attack as Spider-Man is nothing short of menacing. He stalks his prey by lurking in the shadows like a goddamn creature.
Who's there?
Then swoops in out of nowhere and starts beating the shit out of this guy. I've always liked the double window beatdown. But the key difference between Peter and Norman's moments of retribution
Don't hurt me.
is that Peter is wise enough to see the flaw in his actions. Thanks to good parenting. In direct contrast to this, the Goblin only gets more drunk with power. Let's see what he's doing right after this scene. This event in Peter's life humbles him, and he chooses to use his powers for selfless reasons. Unfortunately for Norman, his failure with personal relationships and crusades have turned him sour. He feels he deserves more, despite having all the money in the world,
I started this company.
with others complying with him only out of fear.
Why didn't you wear the black dress? I wanted to impress my father.
He feels isolated and alone, and ultimately jealous of Peter, despite him being just a poor boy from Queens. Peter works for no personal gain. He does it
because it's right.
This is what makes Spider-Man Spider-Man, and Norman, well, a sore loser.
But you can't do this to me.
Peter creates a costume of brighter and positive meaning by himself, and there's no mistaking these colors resembling the American flag, something Insomniac took a little too far. The Spidey costume in this trilogy will always be the most aesthetically pleasing to me. I love the three-dimensional nature of the webbing, and those eyes are just perfect. The unmasking scenes are dodgy, but not everything can be perfect.
Brilliant, brilliant.
Seeing the two outfits clash together on screen is horrifying corny goodness, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. Now let's talk about the person that links everybody together.
Mary Jane Watson.
Her character seems solely written as the love interest. Peter, being the hero he is, sees her as a victim of abuse and stalks her repeatedly, on the way to school, at school, and on the street. He continues this even further as his alter ego. Once she breaks up with Harry, Peter swings right in to score her on the rebound. Oh my god. Okay, look, this could appear as a predatory situation with Peter, but in reality, this is the Goblin's train of thought. We'll get to that disturbing shit in a second. First, I want to talk about what MJ means to the whole story. Her character unfortunately suffers from being written as the ball for the male characters to toss around.
Beat up top!
Don't worry, I'm not calling to cancel Spider-Man. It's just the weakest link of the movie, and what makes it slightly dated. There's a lot behind her character, but I actually don't feel that she's interesting until Spider-Man 3. In this one, she exists solely for the character development of others. While she acts as a victim for Peter to constantly save, she serves as a tool for Norman to use against him. MJ is a lot like Harry, in the fact that they didn't have good childhoods. She was abused by her father and sees plenty of red flags with Harry, especially after meeting his father. But Norman, being the parasite he is, instantly takes a liking to her. I mean, he checks her out right in front of her. He's a nasty man. Norman ultimately becomes full Mr. Hyde when he betrays Harry by pretending to show appreciation and love for him, right after he slips the information that Peter loves MJ. See how this became about Norman and not MJ? Norman's failed attempt at befriending him as both Peter Parker and Spider-Man puts him in ultimate green meanie mode, even referring to himself directly as the Goblin now.
Down came the Goblin and took the spider out.
During the climactic fight sequence on the bridge, Norman tries to inflict his entitled sense of sacrifice on Peter, asking him to choose between attachment and his career-saving screaming extras. Had this been a typical Raimi film, I'm sure they would have all died, but there's no way the studio was going to let this be that simple. This scene reminds me that MJ's character draws a lot of the same energy from other female characters from early horror films, like Frankenstein's Bride-to-Be. While she isn't killed by the jealous monster in this scene, they do, however, place her on the same bridge that Gwen dies at in the comics. Seeing the Goblin hold her hostage echoes classic Universal monster movies like The Creature from the Black Lagoon. But instead of a man with a gun jumping in to save the day, it's a web-slinging superhero. What makes this movie a bit more grown-up than just shooting the monster and saving the girl like in a 30s monster flick is that Peter is far more caring than just wanting to date Mary Jane. MJ is a victim of abuse, and Peter takes it upon himself to protect her by any means necessary, going as far to reject her at the end of the movie, so that his enemies will never find her again. It's a rather conservative romance, but it doesn't drag the film down too much, and it takes his uncle's words to heart. With great power comes great responsibility.
Hey! Thought we had a fight going on here!
That's right, I haven't even talked about the fucking duel. This is the most important scene of the movie. Screw the romance. This is about two gods duking it out. The boy who bit the spider versus the man who was bit by gas. The final fight of this film is where the two worlds of these monsters collide. This scene is what cements Spider-Man as a stylized action horror hybrid. Peter's unfiltered passion to protect Mary Jane and the Goblin's pure utter frustration of his lost ally and surrogate son, you know, a better son. Harry just can't catch a break. This fight is nothing short of brutal. It's grimy, sweaty, and bloody. I don't even think the hospital scene in 2 tops this scene. Well, that's debatable. Norman has lost every part of himself at this point, and Peter even begins to lose hope in surviving this indestructible green garden gnome. All that is left from these 2 lab-grown experiments are the fundamental sides of good and evil. But here's where it gets really sinister. As the Goblin gets out that weird trident thingy, he makes this threat.
Had you not been so selfish, your little girlfriend's death would have been quick and painless, but now that you've really pissed me off, I'm gonna finish her nice and slow. MJ and I, we're gonna have a hell of a time.
Now let me explain something that I've speculated. If we go back to the Thanksgiving scene, we can clearly see Norman's sexist views and behavior.
Mother was beautiful too. They're all beautiful. Until they're snarling after your trust fund like a pack of ravening wolves.
Do what you need to with her, then broom her fast.
He shows a predatory interest in MJ, which could very well be foreshadowing for her kidnapping, which it probably is. But what I think Raimi and the screenwriter put in the subtext here is that he is going to rape her. In most iterations of Mr. Hyde, he actually takes part in debauchery, and the same predatory interests towards women. Usually I find something like this a cheap or tasteless move to make the antagonist more menacing. But here I think it's subtle enough to make the Green Goblin all the more disgusting and terrifying. This of course puts Peter in a state of rage, very similar to his attack on Uncle Ben's killer. Even with that Danny Elfman theme blaring up triumphantly, you still get the sense that this just isn't Peter. He really starts layering in those punches on pervert Gobby. After one final plea for Peter to join him, in this case a bluff, Karma makes a fool out of the Goblin before Peter can tear his limbs off. Now, before we go any further, it's important to understand how narratives treat rapists. Long story short, they usually lose their ding-dong. So if you look closely at where Norman gets stabbed, you can see it's not quite his torso, but more of the groin area. I like to think that was on purpose. Norman's fall into madness is honestly tragic though. When he says, "Oh," it's as if the real Norman realized the monster he had become. Oops, too late for that. This is all debatable though. As for Peter, Mr. Osborn, I'm so sorry, Harry, yada yada, get cucked, great power, the end. Spider-Man is a film that uses elements of horror to sharpen the edge of its otherwise cheerful American backdrop. Horror with pizzazz, if you will. It's not made to be a horror movie, but it sure as hell will try to scare the shit out of you. Raimi is a master of tonal shifts, and it's all at play here, from the goofy extras to the haunting and brutal attacks from the Goblin. Watching lunatics run around in costumes are what monster movies are all about. Aside from the Goblin's destruction, the man behind the mask is the making of a real-life monster, and adds some extra chills behind the action. His very existence fucking tears the rest of the characters apart for the rest of the trilogy.
You stole my father's love.
I think exploring how both their characters are inverted versions of themselves further play into the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde monster movie mashup that is Spider-Man. Raimi's vision for Spider-Man is downright original, and possibly even the influence for many other superhero movies to come. It's a fully realized, timeless world that the creative team does not get enough credit for designing. The sets can be really gothic, but they hold back enough to where it feels realistic, like a softened version of Tim Burton's Batman production designed by Bo Welch. The sets are bold with lavish, over-the-top tech and gothic scenery. Most of the environments are real and underwent hours of designing and construction. I mean, the cemetery at the end is real, which means there are actual dead people there, which means long ago people died just to have their gravestone end up in Spider-Man. Think about that. To add on top of that, the editing is off the wall. Peter's transformation features flashes of skulls and eyes bursting across the screen, and I just love it. The movie is also sprinkled with jump scares ripped straight out of his other movies like The Evil Dead. It's flashy, in-your-face, early 2000s editing that reaches out and grabs you. The dedication of the cast and crew are all brilliant. Willem Dafoe actually sought out the role of the Goblin himself, and Tobey Maguire is just perfect. I love him. All these elements brought together make the perfect superhero movie. Okay, a near perfect movie. To me, it's the best in the trilogy. Spider-Man 2002 puts the pizza in pizzazz and is a landmark superhero film. Its other two installments carry on the torch of mixing superhero camp with horror, and I love them all, despite some reservations with 3.
Big Halloween item.
Spider-Man is a great fall movie in the perfect superhero monster mash. If I'm being completely honest, I've almost overdosed on it already at this point. So have fun not trick-or-treating this year and staying home to watch scary movies. Or just, watch Spider-Man.
Who wouldn't?
Just to get things started out, I've kept this video pretty conventional in terms of movie reviews. But let me tell you right now, it only gets weirder from here. So get ready for some new stuff that's gonna be fun. Shout out to my friend Hank's new channel. He covers a wide variety of topics, most recently including shitting on Disney and creepypastas. Be sure to check it out.